My name is Barry White. I'm a member of the National Union of Journalists for the Leeds and Wakefield branch, and I'm chairing this session, which is, as it says on the tin, looking forward policies for media reform or what next. Basically, what we're trying to do now is pull together the various threads from the discussions up until now, so we go away from here with some clear perspectives for the future. Because we all know what's wrong, but it's what we do about it which is the key issue. Justin will speak first for about 15 minutes, followed by Granville for 15 minutes, then there'll be an opportunity for contributions, and then summing up by both parties to conclude by, we hope, 4:45. Okay, so it's over to Justin.
Thanks again to Barry, Granville and everyone else who helped organise this fantastic event. It's always particularly welcome to be having this discussion outside of London and see such a great turnout as well. On the issue of what to do about it, I think I'm going to just talk in sort of two halves really, because I think the first thing that we have to acknowledge that is, as far as the movement for progressive media reform, that is progressive democratising media policies goes, we are very much back in the wilderness. I think there's no point in pretending otherwise. Certainly within this Parliament, which by all probabilities will go to term, we're unlikely to see any kind of meaningful change, at least legislative change. So I think part of the way we need to think about this question of what we do about it is, what do we do about preparing the ground for what we hope will be a next Labour or progressive government in this country, hopefully in 5 years' time. And that involves, to some degree, organisation. It involves action, the kind of action that this meeting is a good start. We have the Media Reform Coalition hosting our annual Media Democracy Festival, for which Jeremy Corbyn is delivering the keynote. That's in March. That is in London, sadly. But all of this, I think, has to be aimed at building the movement for progressive media change. There was a trending hashtag around the time that Jeremy Corbyn delivered his alternative McTaggart speech on the media, which was hashtag change the media. And I think that the traction that hashtag got is symbolic of how people really do care, not just on the left, by the way. This transcends partisan divides. If you look at the work of lifelong conservatives like Peter Oborne, many people, I was amazingly surprised about how some of the contributors to the legal campaign that I'm launching against Ofcom that I mentioned earlier come from Liberal Democrats and even some Tories. There is a growing, seething discontent and recognition that our media system is not fit for any kind of democratic purpose. And so the challenge for building the media democracy movement is, how do we translate that increasing recognition on the ground, if you like, into a more coherent, organised movement for real, tangible reform? Well, I think there's a couple of things to think about here. One is a language issue. Probably one of the greatest obstacles to the media reform movement, I think, in recent times, has been the word reform itself. Apart from the fact that it's just a slightly innocuous and boring word that might put off most energised young activists, it's a word that whose progressive meaning has been hollowed out by decades of co-option by successive neoliberal governments that have really talked about reform only in the context of things like welfare reform, only in the context of things like BBC reform, which really is what they're talking about, is nothing to do with the progressive connotations that we might associate with the word reform, but rather the kind of neoliberalisation and commercialisation that Tom Mills was talking about and has happened to the BBC over several decades. So I think we need to think of new words. One of the words that I think should replace the campaign for media reform is the campaign for media justice. That should be intimately associated with campaigns for climate justice, for social justice. And the reason is quite simply because it is not, when we're thinking about problems to do with press regulation, when we're thinking about problems to do with media ownership, at its heart, what we are talking about and thinking about is the systemic failure of the media to fairly and justly give voice not just to the left, but also to people of ethnic minorities, to LGBTQ communities, to women. I mean, we have in this country a mainstream press, a national press, that for decades, in fact the best part of a century, has really been characterized by a steady diatribe of misogynistic and racist hate speech. And that all needs to be challenged, I think, through this campaign for media justice. The other thing that we have to do, I think, over the next 5 years is really get to grips with the myth-making that surrounds media policy debates. And I'm going to talk about this in two key areas. One of them is the myth of digital disruption. And this is the idea that you will see repeated over and over again by policymakers across the political spectrum, as well as by editors and owners of newspaper and media more broadly. The idea that basically newspapers in particular, but professional news organisations, are facing terminal decline, and the primary source or cause of that decline is the rise of so-called platform monopolies, social media, etc. Now, the reason why this needs to be challenged is precisely because of why it is such a recurring narrative used by people like Rupert Murdoch, News Corp, etc., in order to justify increasingly rapid consolidation of the news of the news industry, and in order to deflect from critiques of their own power. And in a nutshell, the story is this: because newspaper print sales are declining, therefore the power of the press to influence or shape agendas is declining in tandem. And all of the evidence, as we've seen today, not just some of it, all of the evidence really suggests the very inverse of that. If anything, in terms of their influence across platforms, in terms of their reach, press power has been increasing in recent years. And I can point to all sorts of data that show this. Most recently is the study produced by Reuters Institute of Journalism, which looked at the online coverage of the election and shows, lo and behold, the online news sites that had by far the dominant reach in the campaigns were nothing to do with the Canary, were nothing to do with Squawk Box or any of those so-called partisan online news sites. They were predominantly the Mail, the BBC obviously, the Mail, the Guardian, the Telegraph, in other words, almost exactly the same, very few, largely, almost entirely legacy media brands that dominated the agenda in the pre-digital era. What we have to confront, I think, and challenge is this myth of the so-called disinformation order. It's quite astonishing how much has been invested by Facebook, by Google. Facebook, for example, employing the Atlantic Council, which gets its funding from a mix of very often despotic governments around the world, including many in the Middle East, as well as the British Foreign Office. Their collaboration with Facebook has been based entirely on what it calls countering disinformation. And there are whole research units that have been established in very reputable institutions and think tanks around the world dedicated to tackling this problem of online disinformation. And indeed, if you read the recent government white paper on tackling online harms, all of this is aimed at tackling a particular type of disinformation. And that is, in a nutshell, the kind of disinformation that manifests as a result of some toxic interaction between Facebook algorithms, Kremlin-controlled bots, and maybe throw in a few hard right and hard left news sources like Breitbart. Don't get me wrong, this is a problem. This kind of disinformation. It's a problem, of course it is. It's nothing on the scale of the problem of disinformation that we have faced as democracies for decades, that has emanated from the mainstream press, in this country largely tabloid newspapers, and as we've seen today, that continues to be amplified by some of our most respected broadcasters, including the BBC. So we have to acknowledge, as a starting point, that these problems are not about new media exclusively. They are about new media, they are about old media. They are about RT, and they are about the BBC. And until we start to take, as a movement, a much more holistic view to the problems of disinformation, then we're not going to get anywhere in challenging this overwhelming prevailing narrative, which is not just that we should focus our efforts exclusively on what's going on in social media, but that newspapers, and particularly broadcasters, are the antidotes to this problem. And that the more that we protect them, and the more that we shore up their business models, and the more that we, quote-unquote, save the BBC, the more likely we are to tackle this. And on the question of saving the BBC, I think it's incredibly important, again, that, as Tom was talking about, that we get away from this false binary that either we give in to right-wing attempts to demolish the BBC as we know it, or we just say, save the BBC as it is at all costs. We have to put forward a coherent, cogent alternative for what public media can and should look like in a genuine, functioning democracy. I think I'll leave it there. Is that nice?
Thank you, Justin. Many points for us to ponder on in the next 40 minutes or so, 45 minutes. Over now to Granville.
Thank you very much. I want to start off with a quote from John MacDonald. He's decided to run some left think tanks. We've talked about think tanks today. John MacDonald mentions some of the think tanks, but he says this: we've witnessed, not just in the UK but across the globe, elections can be decisively influenced by the dominating ownership and control of the mainstream press and the resultant permeation of the broadcasting media. Now, we've seen that in our elections. It's happened in Australia. The Prime Minister of Australia didn't expect to win. Outside the case until Murdoch unleashed the media assault on the likely victor. And so we had that outcome. And of course, we haven't talked about it today, but the purchase of overwhelming influence by social media and the use of data targeting. So These are the problems. We've echoed some, we've looked at some of them today. There are these and others. So my first point to you is this. In your pack, you've got a sheet. We need to get some more feedback from you. Any ideas, any policies that need to be brought back to us for two reasons. In 1992, we've been in this a long time. There's people in this room who have been looking at media reform issues for decades. Back in 1992, we ran election watch in Leeds. And the postcard we did is of the Conservative logo. And if you look at it carefully, it's the Sun, the Express, the Star, the Mail, and then Truth Spears and Pants. By the way, when we did the postcard, do you remember Leeds postcards, by the way? Yeah, good. That's it. It's a little nostalgic moment there. When we did the postcard, Leeds postcard said we must get it right, so they phoned Conservative Central Office and said, what is that, for those that know about design and print, what's the Pantone colour that you use for your logo? And they gave it, so that's an authentic, Tory colour. Now, Paul Morton, I want to talk a little bit, we are rooted in the North. The work we do is rooted in the North. Paul Morton lives in Barnsley. He's still active as a designer. He did this, and he did the logo for the leaflet that we put out at the time. It was a wonderful leaflet. It had the dice are loaded, some dice, and it showed the way the Tory press would be the dominant influence. Okay, why do I mention it? Well, because we're going to publish a book. This is one outcome from this event. We're going to publish a book. The first chapter in it is by Tony Harcup, who we employed him. Tony Harcup worked on Leeds on the Paper. Again, some of you will remember it. A really good alternative local paper. If you were active in politics in Leeds in the 70s and 80s, you'd always get an article in Leeds on the Paper because you knew you'd get an audience to come along to a meeting. Tony's going to write a chapter about election watch, the one we did then. But there are other people in this room who are going to write other chapters about the BBC. Nick's going to be contributing. Now that book's going to come out, and we do book launches. We want you to invite you. We want you to think about what you can do to get the book launched, get the ideas that we're talking about out there a bit more. The second thing we're going to do doesn't work very well. This does it? Yeah. We're also going to publish a popular campaigning pamphlet, online and in print, highlighting the issues we've discussed. We're going to do it in a lively way, accessible way, photos, cartoons, key data, getting across the information. And again, we want that pamphlet to be used in tandem, to be distributed around, arguing, and I agree with you, the media reform, the term, it's dead, it's stale. We need to think of new ways of doing it. What I want to do, what the pamphlet wants to do, is to present the case for a broad-based media reform movement. Because I actually do think too much does happen in London. The arguments and ideas that we can put across need to be popularised in a much broader way. So it would argue the need, first of all, for a broad-based media reform movement rooted in communities in the nations and regions. We need to get events which are in towns across the north, where we'll be, and in other areas. And I think the key to it is you've got to link the local, the regional, and the national. We need to be looking. So the issues that face, we've got people here today who work on the YP and the Yorkshire Evening Post. They've been the subject of horrendous cuts, so that the effectiveness of these newspapers has been depleted. I need to say, by the way, and we didn't talk about it, there's such a marked difference between the way that local and regional newspapers covered the election and the nationals. The Yorkshire Post was balanced, the Northern Echo was balanced, the Manchester Evening News was balanced. They reported both sides. Not great, because the resources weren't necessarily there, but they did a reasonable to a good job, depending which paper you look at. Now this is the point I want to get to. You've had great stamina. You've been here all day. Thank you for coming. But as the point was made, we're not typical. We're masochists. We like giving up a Saturday to sit here. But we can do things differently. We can be creative in the way that when people come along to something that they find enjoyable. I'm not saying today hasn't been enjoyable and informative. It has for me. But for many people, it's not their bag. And so we've got to think about ways of doing it. Now, we have done this. I just want to mention this. This is an event held a few miles away from here in Unity Hall, Wakefield, on the 7th of March 2015. Was anybody at it? With banners held high? Yeah, a few of you. You couldn't get any more in the hall. We'd had music, we'd had drama, we'd had film. This was the final speech, Dennis Skinner. You couldn't have got any more people in the hall, but the point about it is that with banners held high, that was the first meeting. It's now gone for 6 years. This coming year will be the 6th year. And it seeks to connect the issues that trade unionists care about. So what I'm saying is it's possible to do it, to look at ways in which you can draw together people and energise them once they're persuaded that there's something that they want to get active around. So it can be done. So this is what we're saying. Our perspective has to be the next 5 years. Make the media an election issue. We need to build a confident, broad-based media reform movement. We need to utilise all the media resources to create trusted alternative media. This is a big issue. It can be done. I mean, where's the Dave's here? Meteor. In Manchester, there's the Meteor newspaper. In Scotland, there's the Ferret. These papers that are around. They can be made into much more popular, widespread sources of trusted information at a local and a regional level. We need to do it. We need to build alternative, independent voices that carry our messages out to a broader range of people. We need media activism, so what you've done in challenging the BBC on the Corbyn thing, we need media activism. What you're doing, Justin, in challenging the BBC and Ofcom over the Newsnight film. Media activism to challenge media lies, distortions, wherever they're published. But our focus, as I say, has to be on the kind of media reform movement which will put the kinds of policies that we can develop over the next few years at the centre of activity. So, we're going to finish with this point and we're going to discussion. When we started Media, and I said it at the beginning of the meeting, we did it on a wing and a prayer. We've got this far on a wing and a prayer. We've done everything by actually self-funding as we've got along, and today. So the three things you could do, we've already mentioned it once. At the back, Sue, and by the way, can I pay tribute to Sue Williams? Done a wonderful job. So join the email list. You'll get MediaNorth, but you'll get details of all of the meetings we do. We're not just doing stuff around media reform. We do meetings all the time, and they're in your pack. You've got the 3 next meetings that we'll be doing. So make a note of them. If there's something you could get involved in, do that. The other thing is that we do need some money. We need money to keep the work going. Produce the book, to produce the pamphlet, etc. And also to encourage, if we can get some money in, we can help to organise the meetings that people already have committed to in different parts of the North to take forward to the next stage. So make a donation, take out a standing order, give you details. And I know it's silly, but you can become a friend as well on cpbfnorth. It's only small, but it's growing all the time. So that's what I want to say. I just want to say, but finally, one thing that actually I think has been very inspiring today. From a standing start, we've been able to put together, I think, a very impressive conference. And I certainly have learned from it, and I know that the range of experience here is something that's been very valuable to help us to do it. So, I think that's all I want to say, except one other tribute. The guy who does, well, 2 tributes actually. MediaNorth is printed by Harris Brothers from Featherstone. Can we pay tribute to Harris Brothers? And Root Publishing produces great books, and Ian Daly, who's been here filming today, if you ever want to read a wonderful book about music, Ian Clayton's Bring It All Back Home, published by Root Publishing. They also publish all the books of the Ken Loach film. Check them out. Support independent publishing, independent voices. So, the last thing I want to pay tribute to, and he lives a few thousand miles away, the guy who does all of MediaNorth design and production is a journalist who's got a great track record, who lives in Toronto, Canada. And so, at around this time of the day, I'd normally be talking to him about putting together MediaNorth. And I'll send him something, and he'll get it back to me, and then in the end, it goes to get printed in Harris. Tony Sutton did the logo for MediaNorth, which I think is great. So that's all I want to say. I think we, next half hour, over to Barry to get your ideas about what you think we need to be featuring and focusing on in the next few years. Thank you.
The next half hour really is to put some substance into what we've heard already. And Justin outlined a number of questions and ideas, and Granville also similar. But it's about coming up with the ideas that can give us confidence to go forward to achieve these objectives. And this is where you come in, because without you, there is no organisation. So can I start with, I'll start from the back on this side.
My name is Sarah Drummond. I am a journalist. I'm an NUJ member. I worked for the BBC for a long time, for 23 years as an editorial leader, and will die a fan of the BBC. And I'm really concerned about the way media is going. I'm now a teacher of multimedia journalism. I'm really concerned about the quality of journalism coming through the next generation. I have some offers of things for direction of travel. I absolutely agree with the equivalent of a Hippocratic oath for journalists, particularly since I've been teaching it. I would start with distribute no lies that you know to be lies. I would sign up to that as a journalist. I always tried to, during my early years, and I would swear on a Bible or anything that you want to give me, and I think that I don't quite know how you enforce that, but I think that it should be something that we're prepared to sign up to. I spent some time working with architects. Architects have a protected status, because if you design something that falls down, it's catastrophic, and not everybody can call themselves an architect. They can call themselves like architectural technicians and things like that now, but I think it's so important that we protect our skill, and that moves me on to the equivalent of kind of #verified. The thing that we have as trained, qualified practicing journalists is we have the skill and the ethics to verify what we publish first. I think that's really important, the verification. I think with an erosion of the number of journalists in the industry now, I've seen it myself. I think the rush to publish before verification, particularly on social media, is a threat to our very skill and standing as journalists. I think we should repel our association with fake news. Apart from just using that phrase just now, I won't say that phrase ever again. I think it's been used to fold back upon journalists. Fake news, okay, that's the last time I say it. I refer to it by its old names, the ones that I grew up with and was taught to repel, and they are propaganda and spin. I think anything else that has the word of my trade in it, we should repel, we should work to repel that. I won't utter that phrase again. And finally, I think at times of elections, that we as journalists should work and campaign for these people to work together. Ofcom, IPSO, the Electoral Commission and the Advertising Standards Authority. And I think that we should hold them to account as much as we try to hold politicians to account.
My name's Nigel,
Yes.
a civil servant. I know there's some people here from Merseyside, and I know about the boycott of the sun on Merseyside. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and long may it can continue. And it's not done with the Labour Party MPs anyhow, because I've got a copy, I've seen the election results of the Labour MPs in Liverpool, and they are fantastic. So whether there's a link between the boycott of the sun and the results for the Labour Party in Liverpool, I don't know, but I just thought I'd mention it. What I'm trying to say is, why can't we do a boycott of the Mail and the other papers around the country? Let's get that campaign going. Also, a few more demonstrations outside the BBC and the Daily Mail and the Express. Let's get people on streets to show what we feel about these newspapers. Let's make it more visible, our presence. And the other thing was, right to reply. I believe at one time, at Channel 4, I mean, tell me if I'm dreaming this, but I remember Channel 4 back in the 80s, did they have a program right to reply, or something like that. I don't know whether they still do that now, Channel 4, or whether any of them have the broadcast that allow people, just ordinary people to go on and actually challenge what they're seeing or on the news. And I don't know whether that, we can do that or argue that we should have a right of reply. I'll leave that at that. Okay, thanks.
Hi. I have a few thoughts, just in terms of reform of the BBC potentially. I just would really like to see BBC more reflective of the UK and the different sections within the UK, and particularly income base and different sexes, genders, just reflective of the variety of the population, and particularly things like the working class, the underclass. I would like to see more integration of those people into the media, because we need more voices to come through. And if there's going to be reform of the media, we need those voices to be there. And so maybe if we see this pressure on the BBC as, maybe take it as a good thing, how can we revise the BBC? I'm thinking market research. Let's do a load of market research around the country so we're more in touch with the people. What do they want from the BBC? What do they want from newspapers? What would make them buy one? Just really get into the heads of people and be in touch with everyone. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Right, thanks ever so much. I'm Ken Richardson. My foot in the media is, as I said earlier, I used to work for a general jobbing printing company in Barnet Castle, where we used to print a weekly paper, where you just folded a piece of broadsheet in half, and we called that for paginations. If you don't know where Barnet Castle is, or what we call Barney, it's sort of, to keep the media theme, it's between Emmerdale Farm and When the Boat Comes In. It's that sort of area. But I wanted to thank you, Granville, and you, Sue. This has been absolutely fantastic, and I've come down from Tyne-and-Wear, and it's terrific to drive 100 miles to find out, 100 miles south to find out what's going on in the north. I can't tell you how pleased I am to be able to do that, but you know my angle here, and all the speakers have been terrific, by the way. Thoroughly enjoyed the day. But I'm here to carry this back to a bit of the UK that really needs this kind of a movement going on. And I hope, we can get it around Miners' Gala Day. The Trades Council that I'm in, Alan Marcham, who's the president of the Durham Miners Association, he's been in the press lately about some of the things he's been saying about the new Conservative MPs in the region. Places that I've campaigned in November and December: Bishop Auckland, South Middlesbrough, South Stockton, Alfred, Darlington. So we really need to challenge what I would call the neoliberal narrative, and if we can reproduce this back home, I prefer Sunderland if we could, because Newcastle's going to get a customs union. Newcastle in County Down. But did you miss that one? But if we can reproduce, yeah, if we can reproduce this, that'd be lovely. Okay, thanks for having us here today.
I agree with everything that's been said, but I think it's too early to start thinking about reform. I don't think we've really addressed the problems. The problem, the key one, was raised earlier. Why did that hairdresser think the way that she did? And we're not addressing it. We're not addressing young. I haven't heard any young people talk about the media, etc., what they want and what they think. But I don't think we can address this until we recognise that this country is completely split. One of the things that amazed me about the whole of the period for the last 3 years on Brexit was the BBC did not refer to their own survey on class in this country. The biggest survey on class that's ever been undertaken, the book published in 2015 by Mike Savage, it didn't say Brexiters, Remainers, but that's what it's about. This country is split from top to bottom on class. Class means more than ever. But it's not the old class system, it's different classifications, it's cultural, and it's split. Until people start to address this, we can't really think about how the media deals with it, or what we're going to do about it. And I think, like the Labour election for leader, they're running away from this issue. There are a couple of good things. One is that the Democrats are bringing a bill to get away, to do away with the immunity on digital platforms, so that you can sue Facebook, etc. And the other one is that it's a Brexit issue. The Europeans have got some really good ideas on this, and the Germans have got really good ideas on reform, and they are going to be plowed ahead with that, and I think we have to support them on that issue.
I'll take Stephen's point just to start. I agree. Clearly, we live in a deeply polarised society, and I, for one, am certainly not someone who buys into the whole kind of media-centric perspective that everyone thinks the way they do because of the media. However, I definitely don't think that you can dismiss the class divisions and the perspectives that people had on the doorsteps, or divorce it entirely away from the possibility that they were, to some extent, influenced by a deeply corrupt media system. So I do think we need to talk about both. I do think that reform of the media is integral to any kind of social justice movement. On that note, I should say I was, and I agree with Stephen on this point as well, very, very disappointed actually about Labour's 2019 manifesto in respect of what it had to say about media reform. It was a regression even from 2017 and a far cry from Jeremy's alternative McTaggart lecture, where he really did talk about the kind of root and branch change that is needed to actually make any even surface difference to our media system. So I think that we have to start putting the flesh on the bones of what does a truly democratic media look like. And to come to your point earlier about accountability in respect of how Ofcom and INSO and even the ASA do their jobs in holding journalists to account, I think that's incredibly important. One of the things actually which hasn't been mentioned today, which is a really urgent campaign that needs to change, is we have a bizarre situation in this country where the Electoral Commission cannot actually regulate political parties for the campaign, the content of the campaign messages that they put out. And I think it's pretty clear that Dominic Cummings caught on to this, that actually it's perfectly legal in this country during an election campaign to just publish lies if you are a political party, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. There is no recourse to justice and no regulatory enforcement. So that's the first thing that I think urgently needs to change, and there is a campaign for that now. The other thing in relation, you mentioned IPSO as well, which we haven't really touched on, is the whole black hole, if you like, of press regulation reform. I think that whatever we think about IPSO, whatever we think about the Leveson recommendations for the press recognition panel, if we are to campaign meaningfully on anything to do with reform of the press, we have to start with resurrecting the part 2 of the Leveson inquiry. It is absolutely shameful that this government, and I would say with the complicity of The Guardian, decided to actively cover up what is probably one of the greatest examples of institutional corruption across our media and political establishment in modern history. That has to be done as a priority. On the point someone made about the about BBC, reforming the BBC, particularly in terms of its representation of Ruth Martell, I completely agree. I think there are very good, very robust proposals drafted by Tom, which really do address that. And I think that, and I encourage you all to look at those proposals. You can find them on the Media Reform Coalition site. But it's just an example, one of many, of how actually this can be done. This isn't rocket science. This doesn't mean the end of the BBC as we know it. On the contrary, it is perfectly imaginable and feasible that just even relatively small changes in the way that the BBC is structured and run and organised could potentially make a material and meaningful difference. And finally, on the point the gentleman made at the back about direct actions, I mean, I completely agree, and I agree with Granville's point here, that we do need to be active on the ground as well. We do need to try and engage younger audiences. These are, after all, the people that have pretty much deserted the BBC, even more than they've deserted the Tory party in recent years. And we need to think about ways in which we can translate these issues into things that resonate with younger generations. Just telling them that they have to pay £13 a month for a license fee when they get Netflix for £5 a month isn't enough. There has to be a much more resonant and powerful way of explaining why public media is so important in this digital age. And I think a lot of it is about how, as Granville suggested, how you conduct these actions, how you conduct these meetings. Just standing with a kind of placard saying BBC bias outside Broadcasting House, I just don't think is enough anymore. I think we should draw lessons from what organisations like Extinction Rebellion have done to think about ways to imaginatively and provocatively communicate this message to a much wider audience.
I agree with everything that Justin just said. I'm just going to take up a couple of points. The right to reply was mentioned. The right to reply. The Campaign for Press and Broadcasting Freedom, one of its cornerstone policies when we set it up was the right to reply. And during the miners' strike, and people don't like me mentioning it, I think it's not relevant. I think it's absolutely relevant. The miners' strike, we had a group of print workers on Fleet Street who used the industrial right to reply. In other words, the people on the Sun, the imperial father of the chapel, I still know his name, John Brown. Green. No, it's John Brown. Who said Green? Well, it's John Brown. I know. You might know a John Green, I know a John Brown. And the imperial father of the chapel, and others, the guy who was on the National Council of the campaign, John Bailey, they took the industrial right to reply. They said to the Sun, to that appalling bully of an editor who did the front page of the Sun on the Hillsborough disaster, The Truth, Kevin Mackenzie, they said it's not on. You're not publishing that picture of Mein Führer of Arthur Schuyler. They stopped it. Now, sadly, Murdoch knew what he was doing when he moved to Wapping. He targeted them to lose the jobs. The key thing is the right to reply should be an essential cornerstone. When those newspapers that published all that stuff during the election, the action of the right reply to say we need space equivalent to what you've given to challenge it. Of course, it absolutely undermines their power. They won't concede it. So in a sense, it's a propaganda demand, but it's demand justice. It's about justice. You can do that. Why can't we have our side of the story. So it's important. Point down here about what we see. We need to have reflected back the experience of people, real people, and their lives and work in different areas of the country. This did used to happen. I record with regret the death of Tony Garnett. I work with Tony very closely. He's got a chapter in the new edition of Shafted that came out last year. Tony Garnett spoke with Banners Held High to a standing ovation, the second one we did. Wonderful speech. Tony Garnett, ironically, was recruited to the BBC because they opened the second channel, BBC Two, and they hadn't got anybody. So Ken Loach got his job at the BBC because of that. So there was a flood of talent who came in to the BBC, and an incredible amount of talent that reflected back the lives of real people who play for the day and other things. But at cpbfnorth, that's one of our policies. We want media that reflect back the report on the life and work and issues of our localities. We need strong independent media to do that, so that's very important. And it's part of, again, absolutely spot on what Justin was saying about the way in which the media itself, we have to try and communicate with young people to get their ideas about what we want. We need the media to reflect not just our experiences, but the young people as well. And how we do that, there were some people here today, I'm sad that some of the people from the younger people haven't contributed, but I must say it's a pretty scary audience to be amongst when you've got some of the people speaking like this. So I hope they've listened and learned something from today. But I will take the other point that Justin made very quickly. I cannot absolutely escape the fact that anybody that has been subject to the way the media's reported on the Labour Party and Corbyn over the last 4 years was immune from it. Yeah. I know from going on the doorstep. Yeah. You heard people actually transmitting the phrases and the language. And it's been going on for 4 years. Brexit started with racism, all the rest of it. So big issues. The media plays an enormous role. But academics are always, maybe on the one hand, on the other. I'm very clear. We've been subjected to a torrent of abuse which has affected the way that people think about their country, the way they relate to people, and it's a deeply divisive message which the sections of the media, not all, have been responsible for delivering. Right.
Thank you. My name's Duncan Hiding, I'm from Suffolk. The reason I came here today, like a lot of people, still really about what happened before 12 and 13. I want to echo a couple of points. Firstly, although I campaigned for the Labour Party in the last election, I'm not a Labour Party member, I haven't been a Labour Party member for over 30 years. I've been on the left, I suppose, for about 50 years, but basically what those 50 years have taught me is not to trust the Labour Party. I will campaign with the Labour Party, I will work with comrades from the Labour Party when I see, as on this occasion, a manifesto I can genuinely get behind. Now, I'm not talking just as an individual, I'm talking about the experience, the way I, as a socialist, experienced the Labour Party. And that is that I think a lot of the comrades here see the Labour Party as John McDonnell, Rebecca Long-Bailey, Jeremy Corbyn. I see the Labour Party as Margaret Hodge, Harriet Harman, Gordon Brown, Tony Blair. See it as a centrist party that invariably, when it tries to actually, when the membership get behind it and get behind the leader who's on the left, what happens, and you lose, is it moves to the right. So this isn't just about mobilising the ground troops of Labour Party membership, it's also about mobilising people like me, fellow travellers, if you like, people who are willing to get behind the Labour Party, that's willing to campaign on the environment, on social justice, on building a green economy, all of those issues And I have to say, one of the most important things for me is I have to be able to vote for a Labour leader who actually says, I won't press the button. I can't vote for a Labour Party that is actually prepared to countenance the fact that a Labour leader, a Prime Minister, will actually press the button and nuke another country. Theoretically, it may be, but that is a moral issue. Now, the issues that we've been talking about today are actually going much, much wider than the Labour Party. Yes, the election is the manifestation of something that's been going on for a long time, and yes, it's the biggest manifestation we've seen in this country. But this has been happening for a very long time. As Justin has pointed out, independent ideas, independent thinkers have been excluded from the media. We look at Question Time now. Who represents the left in Question Time? It's Billy Bragg, it's Russell Brand, it's Mark Steele. When I was first involved in politics, I expected to see Paul Foot. Somebody like a great journalist like James Cameron talking on these kinds of issues. The left has been marginalised in that political debate. And as Justin said, yes, it is about ideology. It's about ideology in the centre. But it's an ideology in the centre that's quite capable of moving to the right, but then not moving back to the centre, and certainly never to the left. So it's about actually finding ways of challenging that ideology. The next point I want to make, and I probably should have said that it's the last one because I've probably spoken too much as it is to pick up Granville's point. This is about how we challenge the media. And it's no good trying to fight them on their battlefield because they've got all the big guns. We have to somehow or other find ways of embracing our weakness and our smallness. We need a guerrilla war. To quote Sun Tzu, the great Chinese guerrilla war leader of 2,000 years ago, it's the war of the three. We've got to find ways of using drama, we've got to find ways of using street theatre, we've got to find ways of using music, we've got to find ways of using cartoons and satire and graphics, we've got to sting constantly and relentlessly against the media. And again, to take Granville's point, it's got to be relentless, and we've got 5 years in which to do it. That's all I wanted to say, apart from saying thanks to Granville, thanks to Sue, thanks to MediaNorth for actually organising this conference.
Thank you very much. Michael Meadowcroft, member of the NUJ for 30 odd years at the Liberal. Firstly, just a quick word to Justin, that it isn't quite true that you can't take action against lies in this election. You've got Section 108 of the Representation of the People Act, which actually forbids it. And it isn't something which is just there not used. It was used in the Saddleworth and Old Louise constituency, where Phil Wallace ran in his opponent as a supporter of terrorism. And my colleague there won the action. So it is possible, but difficult to do. Coming on to the issues. The Conservatives are not just ruthless, but they're also shameless. And they're not just manipulating the media. I mean, the latest one the other day was only inviting people who are favourable to them to a briefing, which is a classic Tory tactic in its own way. But it's also they will manipulate the electoral system. For instance, only having individual registration to vote, which cuts registration down by around 10%. By requiring ID cards to vote, which cuts down a lot of poor people. And then you have the manipulation of the postal vote, which is the easiest way to fit an election that there is. And then the last one is that they will reduce the number of members of Parliament and change the rules for defining constituencies to benefit them. All these are part of a pattern. Now, whether the Tories are ever embarrassable and the newspaper brands are embarrassable, I don't know. But there are ways of trying it. There's no reason why, as part of the tactic, you can't get individual members of Parliament in the House of Lords continue to put motions down, querying what is in the paper. Because it could be up, go on the audit paper. This is enough of this done. It may well succeed in embarrassing them in some way or other. But these are all part of the same pattern, and it has to be called out as to the way that they will manipulate the whole structure of politics to guarantee their election forever.
I don't think we can
wait 5 years for transformation, because if we have 5 years of attrition, that's going to be a massive attritional effect that the next election will be fought on, especially for the left. My view is we need to empower the public to hold public service news broadcasters to account and improve them. And to do that, we need to educate the public. They need to understand, those who want to get involved, how public service broadcasters work, how they are structured. We need access to their archives of news and current affairs programmes, because without them, we don't know what the transgressions are and the patterns of transgressions are. Yeah? Let's empower the public. You know, if we're paying BBC to produce the news, let's have access to the archives. Give the public access to all their archives of news and current affairs programmes. And we need to educate the public on how to make complaints, escalate complaints, all the way up to the legal level. Because that's the way it has to be. And we have to sting them all the time over the next 5 years. Otherwise, the attritional effect for the next 5 years will be on the back foot. Well, we won't have any legs, not on the back foot. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sarah Whitelaw. I'm from Combe Valley Labour. And just a couple of observations, really. Well, from my own perspective, this has been an absolutely fantastic event. I found it so informative and really, really helpful in terms of me understanding a lot more than I ever did about how the media works. In terms of suggestions, I think there's one thing that I've taken from the whole of this election campaign from the Tories is keep it simple, repeat it, and repeat it again. So I think anything that we do in terms of justice in the media has to remember that sort of strapline, keep it simple, and keep repeating it. The other thing I would say is that earlier in the day, Chris Owen talked about the initiative that Unite have taken in schools. In 5 years' time, the 13-year-olds now are going to be able to vote. If we can get on board with helping out that sort of programme, that's going to have a massive effect, or has the potential to have a massive effect on the next generation of voters. And I suppose the last thing I'd say is, it's not a one trick, is it? It has to be a multi-layered, multiple approach. I would be happy to go into schools. I'm an ex-teacher. For everybody, that's not the case. Some people want to stand outside the BBC and raise placards, etc., etc. So I think it's about a multi-stranded approach. It's about using the networks and the community networks that we have. That was a message that came over loud and clear in our last branch meeting. Use the networks we have already. Make the connections with the communities that you have and the groups that you have to get those messages through. And I think that's not bad advice, to be honest.
Hello, yeah. I'm a member of Commoners Choir, which was formed in 2015. I don't know who here has heard of it, but we call ourselves a singing newspaper, and we sing songs about things that need to be sung about. And for most of today, in 2018 we wrote a protest song every month for a year, and because we got sick of going on demonstrations and what do we want? So we wrote a song. So one that's been going around my head is fake news. I won't sing it to you. And I'd love to invite you to our CD launch next week, but we're already sold out. But check us out. We're on the usual channels, as they say. And maybe we could hook up with your book launch as well.
I'm Dave Toomer. I'm a journalist from Manchester and Salford NUJ branch. There's a couple of things that really struck a chord with me, things that Justin said. One was the idea of media justice rather than media reform. I think that's a really apt phrase to now be using. And the other one was the idea of the myth of digital disruption. To be honest, I could have almost punched the air when you said that. It was, I think it's absolutely true that the decline in newspapers is put down a lot of the time to the internet. It's the fault of the internet. The decline in newspapers predates the internet and social media and things like that. It is down to essentially the financialisation, the marketisation of news, when news organisations, I'm talking about local news here, local news organisations were expecting returns of 20-30% on their investments. It was literally printing money. And when the financial crash came in 2008, and when the growth of the internet made itself felt, it accelerated that. And essentially what we saw was thousands of jobs being lost in local journalism, and title after title closing. And what does that mean? Well, it means the denial of justice that you were talking about. It means the denial of social justice in our communities, and removing the ability to hold power to account, both on a national level and on a local level. And it's predominantly not exclusively, but predominantly those areas of social deprivation that suffer with the decline of news. The other thing that I wanted to mention is the point that the nice plug that Granville gave to the Manchester Meteor. I live in Manchester, and I'm involved on a fringe level with the Manchester Meteor, which is Manchester's alternative media, which is run, I have to say, predominantly by young people. I don't play a prominent role in the editorial running of that news outlet. But this is an example of a growing number of, and a blossoming, or you could say, of alternative media, of hyperlocal community journalism that's beginning to develop throughout the country. And one thing I would say, when we're looking for practical things that we can do, this is one thing I would say to you, and that is to seek out your community journalism site, to seek out your alternative media site, whether it be the Manchester Meteor or a straight news hyperlocal site that will provide a local news service in the area. You don't necessarily have to get directly involved in it and be producing stuff, although it would be great if you could. You can take it to your trade union branches. They desperately need money because they're not going to get money from this government. The Cairn Cross Review, the only recommendation that the government did not support in the Cairn Cross Review was the support of public interest journalism. So it's up to us to do it. We have to be the media. So seek out your community journalism site and support it, either through getting involved in it or through supporting it through funding the organisation. And if you can't find a community journalism site in your area, start one. Get together with your comrades, with people in your trade union branches, and start a community journalism site in your area.
Journalists do sign a democratic oath when they start work, at least if they're in the union, because it's called the NUJ's Code of Professional Conduct, and when you sign to be a member, you sign it, you will abide. Now, it won't surprise anybody the reason why it's very hard for journalists to do that. We've heard today about job cuts and so on. The fact is that journalists have become part of the insecure precariat, most of them. The profession has become divided between, as Nick Jones said this morning, highly paid, competent, the arrogant, the commentators and the top reporters who can say what they like, and the rest of them processing the material like in a factory. And one day there has to be a revolt of those people, and I look forward to it, and the NUJ does too. But the question is, what is our, rather than their, relationship to us? Well, part of the insecurity was caused, among journalists incidentally, has been caused by the Leveson inquiry, oddly enough, because what the Leveson proposals did was empower the media owners to increase the already potent message that all their jobs were under threat. That a truly independent regulation system, they'd all lose their jobs, which they were losing anyway because of the fall in advertising and competition from the internet. Now that has serious implications for us. This organisation, the cpbfnorth, I'm sure a lot of people know, is the rump of what used to be called the Campaign for Press and Broadcasting Freedom, which was started by the media unions in 1980, and was really a trade union. It was a labour movement organisation, and that was folded last year. The CPBF went out of business last year. One of the main factors, if not the material cause, was the lack of participation by media workers in it. Now, and support from media workers. Events like this, there are half a dozen of us here today, all of a certain age at least. There would have been a time when there would have been a lot of journalists here, and the kind of things we're talking about were talked about among journalists, which they're not now. What journalists need, like other workers facing the same sort of thing, is confidence. The confidence to obey their code of conduct, which, as the sister here said, the vast majority, the bulk of them, do want to do. Now, we've got to find out ways to give them support. Journalists don't need notification of, well, somebody this morning more or less threatening some kind of vigilantism when we threaten them on their doorstep. They need support. We've got to get them involved in the movement. And I've just, one little thing that has occurred to me today, which is new, and that is this. I was very pleased when Louisa Ball started by telling the story of Laura Koonsberg taking part in the walk out from Downing Street. And that this is actually quite an astounding event. We don't know how it's going to work out. When Justin this morning defined the hardline consensus, which has always operated on, which is the prism through which media see the world, that has continued undisturbed for many decades. And well, whenever there was a Labour government, they had absolutely no trouble absorbing it. The Labour Party ran to get in it. But now something complete opposite is happening, which is the consensus is under really powerful attack from the right. We've got the Steve Bannon, Dominic Cummings kind of people who are currently engaged in destabilising the relationship between journalists and the state. It's commonly recognised that, or it's commonly alleged that the coziness between the media and media controllers and working journalists and politicians and the government is one of the big problems. That the alienation of large sections of the community from those governing them is this very precise disdain that comes from their superiority and is seen as this coziness there. Now, Dominic Cummings is trying to smash that by trying to move the lobbies and trying to select journalists to brief. Now, perhaps if this happens, there will be an in to get more involved with giving journalists support from outside. So, I mean, one of the things that, as a working journalist and other media workers here, if part of our movement can be to get involved with and give and organise what political support you can, that would be really good. You couldn't have a medical reform movement without doctors, and you couldn't have a legal reform movement without lawyers. You've got to have more media workers involved. And the media unions are in complete support, but they are not, I don't want to say in retreat, but their members are nervous about this kind of thing. We have to work with them to build the movement.
Is it possible, is this pie in the sky, that the Canary and Squawk Box and Unity News and the Morning Star, etc., could all spend a weekend together to see if we can create something on the left that's got critical mass in the media?
Thank you very much. Justin, 30 seconds.
30 seconds, oh gosh. I'll tell you what, just one thing that I think a couple of those last points Tim and the gentleman here were referring to, which we haven't really talked a lot about today, is media ownership. A lot of academics think about media ownership as some kind of antiquated problem that doesn't really exist anymore. I'll use a very unacademic phrase to say I call it bullshit. I think that it's very clear that the owners of not just newspapers but media across platforms have hugely vested, concentrated power, are still able to dominate and influence conversation. And again, there is a solution. There is a way in which we can reform both media ownership and plurality rules that is absolutely fit for a 21st century media system. I encourage you to look at the Media Reform Coalition for further details of that. And I'll just finish with the point that the lady said about the need for slogans following the Cummings approach, hashtag change the media.
No, I think Justin's covered the point. I'm very conscious. We've run a quarter of an hour over time, and I was told to get out of here at 5 o'clock. So all I'm going to do is say that I've listened to all the points that we've made, and I think that we've got a huge opportunity to take things forward. So I'm going to just thank you for coming, thank you for your contributions, and donating to the bucket on the way out.